Alexander 14, April 3rd, 45,784 BC. Theirs was the epitome of true love. It had been nearly 12 years since the other Tuwalans had gone, and Hemhut and Lailan could not have been happier. He had taught her, among so many other things, to speak English, his first language, and it was easier now for him to communicate to her some of the more complex ideas necessitated in pursuit of fully, truthfully answering some of her deeper questions about reality. He shared his love of the mundane and his endless fascination with the subtle intricacies of existence, and she learned a great deal about everything from him. She began herself to question that which most Tuwalans had taken for granted, and was steadily becoming a scientific mind in her own right. He loved her with a passion rivaled only by that of hers for him. Today, her flower wreath was yellow and purple, two of her many favorite colors, and it brought out the color in her eyes as it sat like a halo atop her head. She was hungry, and though he could have manifested for her anything she desired, Lailan preferred to hunt and forage for her own food. She was remarkably quick, and would catch fish with lightning speed using her bare hands. With the paw-traps having been wiped off the face of Tuwala in the blink of an eye, Hemhut stewing in response to a plea from the Tuwalans, the waters were safe and the fish were plentiful. Half of Tuwala remained under a thick sheet of ice, but Hemhut held it back from spreading further, and there was warmth and life on Pafa-Adoa, preserved there for his love. She splashed and kicked the water carelessly, her catch in hand, as she walked back to where Hemhut had built her a fire. She skewered the still living fish and held it over the fire and talked to him as her dinner cooked. "It is interesting to me, my love," she said, mostly in English, "that you do not eat. You expend energy in your motion, in your being, presumably by giving off your heat, yet you seem to take in no energy. How is it that whatever energy you have has not been depleted, considering you never replenish it?" "That is a good question, my love," he said, marveling at how she looked with the firelight illuminating her. The funny-looking girl had become a breathtakingly beautiful woman. "I do not know. I can only speculate." "Good enough for me," she said. "Proceed then." "Well, I think it has everything to do with how I inverted time and space around me," he said. "In order for you to have a true understanding of the concept, I will have to explain to you advanced physics and the theory of special relativity." "What's that?" she said. "Is it like the laws of motion?" "It is built off of them, yes," he said. "It is collectively advanced mathematical theory to explain our observations of reality and explain how it works. And it implies that there are boundaries imposed on the universe on both the grandest and most infinitesimal scales." "Oh, poop," she said, turning her dinner over to evenly cook it. "I hate math." "Oh," he said, dipping his head, a bit despondent. A brief few seconds passed, and the sound of the sizzling flesh of the fish became more prevalent. Then, cocking her head, realizing that he was disappointed by her apparent lack of interest, she said, "Well, can you teach me how it works without the math?" He brightened and looked at her with a little smile, and confidently said, "Yes, my love, yes, I can." He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, hovering near the fire, and she came over and plopped down atop one of his knees and watched her catch as it started to brown over the flames. She said, "Very well, my love. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Teach me more of how the universe works." "Look at the lights in the sky, my love." And he darkened the sky well beyond the dim of dusk that had been moments ago awash across it. "The light that comes from some of them is billions of years old, and it travels at a fixed speed through the vacuum of space until it passes through a medium or reflects off of something. Then it adapts, usually by changing direction, and continues on, resuming its intrinsic speed the moment it again encounters vacuum, carrying new information with it, namely the imagery and other data from that which it has interacted with." "Hemhut, you've already taught me all of that," she said. "That's basic stuff." "Just wait, Lailan," he chuckled a bit. "What would you say if I told you that the light itself does not experience the passage of time as it traverses the cosmos at light speed?" "I'd say you better have some good evidence to back up that claim," she said, looking up at him, ears higher up than he'd ever seen them. He let a pause go by as she stared into his eyes, thinking to herself. Then she said, You're serious? Tell me everything. Let's begin with the constancy of the speed of light, he said. Light travels at approximately 300 million meters per second, regardless of the relative speed of objects interacting with the light. This is different than what we intuit, because if you throw a stone at me and I run away from the stone, I would subtract my speed from the speed of the stone. Say, if you threw it at me at 10 miles per hour, and I ran in the same direction, putting distance between us at 9 miles per hour, it would hit me with the same force it would as if it were going 1 mile per hour and I were standing still, effectively reducing its speed relative to my perspective and negating the full potential force of its transfer of energy to me. Even though from your perspective the rock always went 10 miles per hour, it hit me with the force equivalent to having been thrown at 1 mile per hour because of my subtracted speed. The same effect would compound the speed and force of your stone if I were running toward you and not away from you, effectively increasing the speed of the stone and the amount of energy that would be transferred to me when we made contact. Strangely enough, this is not true for light. Even if I were running at 90% the speed of light, I would still measure all incoming and outgoing light to be at the constant speed of approximately 300 million meters per second. So, if instead of throwing a rock at me you shone a light in my direction, my speed would not be subtracted from or added to the speed of light. What an observer watching me go at such a speed would see instead would be very strange, for they would observe that the process of time for me will have slowed down. If there were a clock on my chest, they would see it ticking time off more slowly than a clock of the same construction under observation on their own person. The reason for this is because of the constancy of the speed of light. It is one of the effects collectively caused by the phenomenon known as time dilation. Whoa, she said, taking the first bite of her dinner. Slow it down, back it up. Okay, why is it that this happens? The speed of light is the limit to the speed of existence, evident by the cessation of time when such speed is achieved, he said. It takes time to accelerate. When you are frozen in time, you can go no faster, because there is no time to do so. Additionally, increasing velocity requires the use of energy, and the energy required to push an object must be greater than the current energy of the object that you're trying to push. There again, light speed sets the limit. A material object should never be able to achieve light speed because the energy requirements are too great. In order to push something to the speed of light, one would need to be themselves already going the speed of light. Hold on, she said. You once told me that there are stars and galaxies that move at such great speeds that they rival the speed of light. Only from our perspective, my love, he said. And could we inspect them closely from such a distance, we would see processes of nature slowed down consistent with the speed of our mutual recession from one another, due to the effects of our differing relative experience of time. Likewise, they would see us slowed down to the same degree if they were observing us. And for them, the passage of time would seem as normal to them as ours does to us. This is one aspect of the great dance, of what is called the relativity of simultaneity. Everything exists experiencing its own unique progression of the passage of time. Wait, she said. What I was going to say is this, and she pointed up at the sky. Let's say that star was moving left at 80% the speed of light, and then that star was moving right at 80% the speed of light. Wouldn't they both agree that the other was moving faster than the speed of light? How would that factor in? We're getting back to time. Don't let me forget about that. But when you say that something can never go as fast as or faster than the speed of light, what do you actually mean? How fast are we going right now? If I add speed to our current speed, do I have to factor in the rate of motions of Tawala, the solar system, the galaxy, and so on? Speed itself is measured by relation to your surroundings. Plus, you told me that one day the expansion of space would cause galaxies to move at faster than light speed and disappear from view. How can you say nothing can move at light speed when the expansion of the universe will eventually inevitably cause everything to move faster than light? Very astute, my love. I will explain, he said. The accelerating expansion of space, the phenomenon dubbed the result of dark energy, though it does cause the speed of galaxies to increase, it does so by increasing the distances between them, not by accelerating the motion of the galaxies. If dark energy imposed acceleration upon galaxies, it would be felt by the galaxies, and that would be an observable effect. Just as when you are seated in a vehicle that accelerates, you feel yourself pressed back against the seat. There is no accompanying force of acceleration exerted on the galaxies during the expansion. Therefore, their speeds only increase relative to one another due to the stretching of space between them, not because of an actual increase in their intrinsic speed. If there is no force of acceleration, there is no increase in speed relative to one's relationship to light speed. Dark energy causes there to be more distance between objects without actually increasing their speeds. I hope that's not too hard to understand. No, I think I'm kind of getting it. But then how does one know what their actual speed is in comparison to the speed of light? How do you know how fast you're actually going? She asked, picking a bone out of her mouth and tossing it into the fire. Another excellent question, Lylin, and the answer is simple, he said. First, tell me what you think. What would your hypothesis be to devise a method of obtaining one's true speed? Well, it would be useless to measure your speed relative to your environment because you would then have to factor in the rate of motion and direction of the greater environment, and you would wind up coming to the same point of uncertainty. Since there is no fixed stationary point in the universe that can lay claim to being truly stationary, it seems to me like it would be impossible, she said. You certainly couldn't measure it by any traditional means. It must have something to do with how you said that the speed of light is always, what did you say? 300 million meters per second, Hemhut said. Yes, that, she said, and she hopped down and shed her dress and waded into the water. Come swim with me, Hemhut. She reached a hand back for him. I don't know how you can measure something's true speed. Come here and tell me. Yes, my love, he said. He stood and followed her into the water. The water was the only place where they could look one another in the eye comfortably, and Lylin loved swimming with him. She wrapped her arms around him and kissed his cheek. Can you play some music? She asked, and he nodded, and orchestral music began to inexplicably play from nowhere and everywhere at once. All right, how do you measure it? Simple, my love, he said. You push it. You determine how much force is needed to further accelerate it, and the energy requirements tell you how fast it is going. If you are traveling at 60% the speed of light, and you want to increase your speed in the direction in which you are moving, you would need a push with a force great enough to accelerate to faster than 60% the speed of light. The harder it is to make it go faster, the faster it's already going. Imagine pushing a rock. If it is stationary, it will take a force greater than the rock's mass to move it and no more. So you push harder and harder until it moves, then you know how much energy it takes to move it at all. Now imagine that the rock is rolling away from you almost as fast as you can run. You try to add energy to it, to increase its speed by running into the back of it, but despite adding your excess energy to it, you can only ever make it roll as fast as you can run and no faster. And in order to push it faster, you would need more energy. You would need to become a faster person to roll the rock faster. When you calculate the energy requirements to move an object, factoring for its mass, you get its actual speed, its intrinsic speed. This concept is tied into relativity by what is known as relativistic mass, and it relates energy and mass in such a way that it mathematically bridges the gap between them, making them conceptually the same thing. Energy and mass are equivalent. Energy equals mass at the speed of light squared. In a simplistic way of thinking about it, consider it this way. It takes, say, 20 pounds of force to move the rock. That 20 pounds of force is necessitated by the mass of the rock. Trying to push the same rock to near the speed of light, it would require much more force to push it. Mathematical derivations imply that since it is harder to push, it has become more massive, and since it has not gained actual mass by taking on more matter, the kinetic energy it has gained, the energy of its motion, must be contributing to its mass. Thus, mass equals energy. This is also true in a literal sense in that all mass is derived from energy. Energy being the value of massless particles in place of matter, which later becomes mass, when such particles are slowed by the Higgs boson and then comprise the subatomic particles which make up our very beings. The math is really very simple. I'm going to take your word for it because, like I said, I don't want to start on math. It's too hard for me, she said. Okay, I have more questions about that. But tell me more about how time works. That seemed really interesting. Oh, it is, my love, he said. The music played from out of Tawala, and little ripples in the water accompanied some of the deeper bass notes. Insects could be heard chirping in the night, and the light from the beachside fire glinted off of her eyes as they floated face to face. It was a perfect night. All other nights were perfect. Too perfect. Tawala was ravaged, and being ever more stripped of her fruit in the name of his love, but he did not care. He did not care one bit for the suffering of the other animals. He did not care that he was rapidly narrowing the habitable portion of Tawala's surface to accommodate her every comfort. He cared only for her. He made the image of 2 squares appear in the sky, and he said, "Imagine that I am in one of those boxes and you are in the other, and we are bouncing balls in sync with one another." And he made the image of them in their respective boxes, each bouncing a ball in time with the other and playfully interacting. "Now, I'm going to set your box in motion and watch what happens. In order for you to keep bouncing your ball at the same speed as I do, it will appear that you will have to bounce your ball faster." "What are you talking about? I am still bouncing the ball at the same speed as you," she said, watching. "I can see it with my own eyes." "That is because the speed involved is low, so that we cannot visualize it. But I assure you that it appears that you are bouncing your ball faster to keep it in time with mine. Because time is relative to space, the experience of which is limited by the speed of light, and your increasing speed will slow your experience of time relative to mine in the stationary box as you move through space at the expense of energy. Not noticeably, but enough so that you would have to, on an infinitesimal scale, bounce your ball at a slightly increased rate in order to keep time with me, if I am stationary in comparison to you, because the light we see from one another must move at the same speed regardless of motion or acceleration. During the process of your acceleration, time would pass slower for you than for me. Once you level your speed and are no longer accelerating, we will mutually appear to be slowed by the same amount, as you would perceive me to be in motion and I would perceive you to be in motion." "Are you actually trying to tell a joke, Hemhut?" she asked, "'cause that's pretty good." "I'm serious," he said. "As I said before, it has everything to do with the constancy of the speed of light. Remember, like outrunning a stone or running toward it to change its speed and relative mass, that ball that you're bouncing can vary in its speed. You can choose to bounce it faster, giving it more energy, or slower, intentionally taking energy from it. The same is not true for light. If light beams were bouncing back and forth inside of those boxes, they would always move at the same speed. So if I sped up your box, you would never be able to bounce the light any faster to match the speed at which you perceive me to be bouncing the light the way you could do with the ball. The difference would become very clear very quickly at high enough speeds close to the speed of light, what are referred to as relativistic speeds. You, accelerating at high speeds relative to me, would see that my light was bouncing back and forth very quickly, much faster than the speed of light, and you would perceive your own light, the one traveling with you, to be bouncing at normal light speed, and I would see you as being slowed down to a significant degree less than the speed of light. Then, again, once you stop accelerating and maintain a constant speed and trajectory, we will mutually observe one another to be slowed to the exact same degree despite experiencing our own time normally." "Aha," she said. "You are kidding around with me, aren't you? You just contradicted yourself. If light always travels at the same speed no matter what, then why would we see the light in each other's boxes traveling at any other speed?" "How many times have I told you that I love your skepticism now?" He looked at her, her ears down, arms around him in the water. "Well, you haven't said it yet, but when you do, she said, "it'll have to be like 50,000. I love you, Hemhut. You better be going somewhere with this." "I love your skepticism, and I love you, Lylin. Never believe anything until you have questioned it thoroughly enough to determine that it is a reasonable belief. Never accept that anything you deem questionable is true just because I or anyone else says that it is," he said. Then he took the 2 representations of them out of the conjured images of the suspended squares, and in their places placed a pair of white dots. "Okay, look again. The dots in the squares represent photons. For the benefit of the demonstration, we're going to pretend that the moving box is moving at relativistic speeds, at a significant fraction of the speed of light. In order to do that, we're going to slow the speed of light down to where we can see the photon bouncing back and forth between the top and bottom of the squares. But we're going to keep the photon moving at a constant speed, despite slowing it down, consistent with how it behaves at normal speeds. Here they are, both stationary, both rhythmically bouncing the photon at the exact same speed, both photons making contact with the tops of both squares simultaneously, and both photons making contact with the bottoms of both squares simultaneously, the same way that we were doing before while the representations of us were bouncing balls. Now, I'm going to set your box in motion without accelerating it, just set it into sudden infinite motion. The square that formerly housed the image of Leyland began moving in a uniform way, and the bouncing white dot visibly slowed down. Watch, it slows down. They fall out of sync. Why do you think this happens, my love? Hemhut, she said, I do not know at all. I couldn't even guess, and I still am not convinced this is real. This better be real. The moving square with the slowed photon appeared back in the start position, alongside the other, and they resumed their synchronized stationary rhythm of bouncing the light beam slowly back and forth. Hemhut looked away from her and up to his display in the sky, and said, What you are seeing represented here is a light clock. Just like any other clock, it keeps time making use of a cyclical pattern, namely the points of contact with the top and bottom as it bounces back and forth. The reason that the speed of the photon in the moving box appears to slow down is simple. It has to do with how long it takes for that photon to make contact with the top and bottom and repeat its cycle, relative to a stationary observer. Now, if you trace out the path of the photon as it bounces between the top and bottom of the box while it is stationary, you get a short length, just the height of the square, no more. This is a 1-for-1 perception of the rate of time relative to the stationary square. Anything stationary alongside you will experience a similar rate of time as you. Therefore, both of the boxes sitting side by side would appear stationary relative to one another and to any observer anywhere. They would exist at the same rate and experience the same flow of time. Their progression of time would be shared. Now, if you trace the path that the light takes from our vantage point as observers when you set one of these boxes into sudden motion, instead of tracing an up and down path, you would then be tracing a double diagonal path to track the photon in the moving box, you see. In his demonstration, as Leyland's box was set into motion, a dotted line traced the trajectory of the white dot as it bounced up and down in the middle of the moving box, and it mapped out elongated double diagonals trailing behind the dot in the moving box, first tracking it as it moved up and bounced off the top of the box, and then down as it proceeded toward the bottom, taking considerably longer to make contact with the top and bottom than the photon of the stationary box. The speed of light does not change to an observer, you see, he said, and since the light must take a longer path to get from the bottom of the box to the top and back again, much longer than that of the stationary box, events in the moving box appear to be slowed down. It's a compensatory mechanism for maintaining simultaneity. Remember that anyone inside of the square moving at relativistic speeds would observe the contents of the stationary box to be going through time at an equivalent decelerated rate, and would themselves believe that they, in the moving box, were experiencing time and existing at a normal rate, and argue that it is not them that is slowed down, but that it is they who are slowed down. Why? Because they are both correct. So long as one is not accelerating, or rather, is not feeling the force of their acceleration, they can both argue that they are stationary and that it is other things which are truly in motion around it. This is the concept at the very heart of relativity, my love. This is known as the equivalency principle. It is one of few mathematical theories that not only suggests that there are multiple answers to one question, but that actually necessitates it. And the really wonderful thing is that all of the correct answers are correct answers, no matter how much they differ, because perspective is what the experience of time is all about. The light clock can be substituted in this demonstration for any other clock, any device that precisely segments cyclical intervals of time. It doesn't matter. It's not about the construction of the mechanism, it's about the speed of the light coming from it. So long as the constituents of neither box feel the force of acceleration, they will observe the other to be progressing through time slowly, believing that they are experiencing time normally. Now, why is it that light does not experience the progression of time when it is moving at light speed? If you carry out this notion of relativity to its extreme, push something all the way to the speed of light, its time slows to nothing. The ball no longer bounces, and it remains oblivious to the passage of time, despite potentially existing for an eternity. Light beams potentially experience the full age of the universe in practically no time at all. Perhaps something you may find is one of the more startling implications of this theory is that when something is in a state of acceleration, their natural processes slow down relative to their initial reference point. This means that active self-propelled motion actually keeps you younger than others in your direct environment in an infinitesimal way. This effect is greatly magnified at relativistic speeds, potentially so great that one could theoretically accelerate continuously until their experience of the universe speeds up to nearly the frozen experience of light, and one could watch astronomical events that take millions and billions of years play out before their eyes in a matter of minutes or even seconds. To an observer, the continuously accelerating object would appear to be veritably frozen in time with regard to observation of its processes, and yet the object itself would feel as if time was passing normally, and they were simply feeling the subtle force of a gradual acceleration. Bizarre, she said. How did we ever start talking about this anyway? You asked me why it is that I think I don't eat, he said, making the visual aids he'd manifested disappear into thin air. Oh, she said, and flapped her ear where the tip had touched the water. And why is it that you don't eat? I'm getting there, my love, he said. Now I will tell you about the time after the first long moment, which was the second in linear time, and the inner workings of the time machine that I devised, which was responsible for both the destruction and the creation of the universe. For it was perhaps in part a consequence to this event that I have become what I have become. All right, she said, breaking from him, using him as a platform to push against with her feet, and then swimming back to the beach. Come on, Hemhut, tell me by the fire, I feel like dancing. He followed her back to the fire and sat, watching her as she slapped the sand off of her dress and slid it down over her body. She twirled up to him and asked him, Can you play some dance music for me? Of course, my love, he said, and the orchestral music faded away to be replaced by more upbeat rhythmic music. Okay, Hemhut, she said, tell me, how did you do all of this? Quite by accident, my love, he said, and yet altogether intentionally. Riddles now, my love? She shook her head and started moving to the music. I swear if by the time the night is through I don't have a complete understanding of why you don't eat, I'm going to slap you crazy.